as we go, I'll go ahead and let those folks in. But thanks everyone for joining us here this afternoon or morning, wherever you happen to be in the U.S. Today's little session is it's a little webinar because there's a new way that we're going to be recording orphan and foster lambs in the Pedigree Master Software. And so there's some potential impacts there to the evaluation that we're going to talk about here today. So just a couple quick little housekeeping notes. We are recording this session, so you can go back and you can take a peek at anything that you might have missed the first time, or if there's other folks that weren't able to join and you think they need to hear it, feel free to send them this information. We'll get it posted up on the NSIP website. If you have any questions, feel free to use the chat function or the chat box here on Zoom. I did have everyone muted when you came into the room, just to try to minimize on background noise. So if you're not actively talking or asking a question, if you can keep yourself on mute, that'll help with eliminating all that background information or all that background noise. So the way we're going to run things here today is Dr. Ron Lewis, the NSIP technical advisor and professor at University of Nebraska, is going to start off with some of the background, lay some of the framework for these new changes in the recording. And then I'll take over and go through a couple examples. I'll just pull up PedigreeMaster because I think the best way to learn a new technique is to actually do it. So I'll show you in my PedigreeMaster how we're handling these different situations, and we'd be glad to take any questions that might come up. So with that, I'll go ahead and let Dr. Ron Lewis take over, and he can lay some of the framework here.
Thanks, Rusty. And thanks for everyone joining us today with, in a way, a launch of a new approach that we'll be taking to recording fostered and artificially reared or orphaned lambs. What my role today will be is to try to put it into a perspective, a context as to why this change makes sense and how it will move towards helping us do a better job with our recording of these events. As Rusty nicely said, if you have questions, if you at least until the end of the little bit of presentation I'll be giving, if you could send those through chat, I'll try to address them as they fit in. And then at the very end of the few slides that I have, there'll be opportunity for questions, and we might open our mics in order to do that. So with that starting point, that introduction, let me go ahead and talk through some ideas. I'm going to turn off my camera because our internet is not always brilliant here at the house, and it's sometimes a little bit easier to not have a camera on. So I'm going to stop my video and we'll go from there. So these are the things that I like to visit with about an introduction to this. First is really what our aim is being part of NSIP, because it drives this kind of change. I think our aim is to reliably estimate breeding values, and really that entails accurate recording. And I'll make a few more comments about how that fits into this grander story. And then I want to get into the context of fostered and artificially reared lambs and how our recording that we adopt affects the lamb, particularly at weaning time, and how we evaluate it. And as importantly, the dams of those lambs, primarily in terms of the number of lambs a ewe or a dam is accredited for at weaning time. So that would be the context of where we go. So our aim, reliably estimating breeding values. So what we try to do is we take performance records on our various breeds, and from those performance data, those Ps, the first thing we need to try to do is to pull out some of the environmental effects that impact how animals perform, whether it's in a grazing system or over winter when they're dealing with some of the climatic effects of overwintering. We need to try to remove those environmental impacts to get a hold of what their genetic merit is. And we summarize that genetic merit, or their genotype in a broad sense in terms of our estimated breeding values. And I show 4 of them here that are commonly used as you all take decisions on which animals you select to keep and are relevant to our discussion about fostering and artificial rearing. The weaning weight, maternal weaning weight, the number of lambs born, and the number of lambs weaned. I believe all of those will be more or less impacted by these changes. And to do a good job of that, it really does entail that we do a superb job in recording and reporting information that matters on economically relevant traits on lots of animals. The more we know, the better job we can do. And that involves not only performance, but also in our pedigree recording. All that impacts the quality and the accuracy of our genetic evaluation, and include a cartoon there that perhaps takes a little different perspective that we see in many industries, and one I think NSIP is working very well to try to address. So we want to estimate breeding values well, and that entails doing a good job in our recording. That's the bottom line on this. So the context of today is all about fostered and artificially reared lambs. And I'm going to begin by talking about how I think about how it affects lambs and their genetic evaluation. And as Rusty starts talking about the mechanics and Pedigree Master on addressing the impact on lambs, I think we have, in a way, 3 categories in how we think about lambs as they grow up through rearing. So we have lambs that are born and are reared by their own genetic dam. So I'll be using that term, genetic dam, throughout to clarify who truly is serving as the mom, if I may, of a lamb up through weaning time. So we have lambs that are reared and born and reared by their own dam or own genetic dam. We have lambs that are born clearly by their genetic dam, but they're reared by a foster dam. So they're cross-fostered onto another ewe. And we have another set of lambs that, again, they have their own genetic dam at birth, but they're then artificially reared on a bottle. And we often refer to those as orphaned lambs as well. So it's really those 3 categories that we want to do a better job of delineating in the way data are entered in Pedigree Master and how they're handled in the genetic evaluation. So that's the crux of our discussion. Is everybody comfortable with that? Or are there any questions at this point on that? Okay, seeing none. So let me move on to thinking about how this builds into our evaluations. I always think of things diagrammatically, so you're going to have to bear with me because I'm going to put forward several diagrams to kind of illustrate some ideas. So I want to think about what affects a lamb, particularly at weaning time. So they have a sire and a dam, and down at the bottom, those are supposed to depict lambs of that pair. And we have what are called direct effects that the sire and dam contribute, in this case, to the growth of those lambs at weaning time. So those are the alleles, the genes that sire and dam pass directly to their progeny. Half from the sire, half from the dam. They come together to produce their offspring. So we refer to those as direct, often direct additive effects, and I'll review this terminology in my next slide as well. So they directly contribute to the performance of those lambs at weaning based on the alleles or genes that they contribute. But the dam actually does more. She kind of comes around the right-hand side, if I may, and she makes a maternal contribution to the performance of those lambs. That is both a reflection of her own genetic merit for being a mom, and they also reflect some environmental factors that remain permanently with that dam that also contribute to her ability to be a better mother or otherwise. So she contributes actually not only directly through the alleles that she contributes, but the genes that she has, her genetic merit as a mom, as well as some environmental factors that permanently impact her performance to be a better, or if I may, a worse mom. And one of the challenges in genetic evaluation, I'll say this again, is trying to dissociate, to try to pull apart all of those bits, because it's all being done on really a single measurement, which is the weaning weight of our lambs. And that's why this recording properly of what's going on as those lambs move towards rearing becomes so very key in what we do in genetic evaluation. So let me review a couple of these terms, as I'm going to use them throughout. So one way that parents affect their lambs at weaning are these, what we call these direct additive effects. Those are the genes, the alleles that lamb inherits from its parents. And that is quantified in our genetic evaluation in what is called WWT, weaning weight. Those are capturing those additive effects of the parents on the performance of their progeny. But we also have these maternal effects that impact coming around from the right-hand side, that the dam contributes to the performance of her progeny. Some of those are genetic. We call those the maternal additive effects. And those are being captured in what it would be the MWWT, or the maternal weaning weight, that is obtained, predicted, and provided on our sheep. And that's the dam's genetic capacity to provide better or worse maternal care. So what she's inherited that makes her a better mom or otherwise. But in addition, there are some environmental effects that stay permanently with the mother. They are not genetic, they are not passed from mother to progeny, but they do impact how she performs as a mother. Examples of that: if a ewe succumbs to mastitis early in life and only loses a part of her mammary gland, part of her ability to produce milk, that's not genetic. That certainly isn't the lamb's fault. It's not inherited, that limitation, but it certainly impacts what that mother can do in terms of providing a good maternal environment to her progeny. Another illustration on this, in breeds that have shearing, if you have a lackluster shear and they nip or cut off a teat, clearly that permanently impacts the ability of that ewe to be a good mother. And it's not her fault that that happened during shearing time. So those are all what we categorize as permanent environmental effects. And in our genetic evaluations, we're trying to pull all those bits apart into separate components as we estimate merit. And to put it into a context, in our genetic evaluation, when we think about weaning weight, this is the relative contribution to the variation that we see in weaning weight, in phenotypic performance for weaning weight from these various factors that impact a lamb's weight. The direct additive, the genes that are inherited directly from the sire and dam, they're contributing about 10% to the overall variation. This is an average across our major breed types. Some it's a bit less, some it's a bit more for each of these, but on average, it's about 10% of what we see. So appreciate it's only a small slice of an animal's performance. The maternal additive effect, well, it's contributing about 9% to what we see in the way a lamb will perform. Those permanent environmental effects from the dam, the maternal permanent environment, that's about 11%. And the rest, 70%, which is a lion's share, is due to everything else that impacts the way that lamb performs. Husbandry, seasonal effects, availability of grass, and the ability, therefore, of you to convert energy into milk production. Any kind of a climatic stressor that might impact the way an animal performs. That really drives much of what we actually see in those phenotypic records. About 20% is additive, genetic. 11% we parse off to that maternal permanent environment, And everything else effectively is just noise that is not genetic, that impacts the way animals perform. So I see a question about, don't we see mastitis becoming common in family lines, so at least partially affected by genetics? It's a very fair comment. Indeed, it can be genetic differences between different ewes in a flock. But really what I'm talking about when I'm referring to these maternal permanent environmental effects might be those that aren't inherently genetic in their origin. A ewe happens to succumb to disease. Indeed, there may be some susceptibility that gets tangled up with trying to delineate that. Perhaps the better example is a ewe, being hurt physically by getting caught in a fence, or as I mentioned, a teat being sheared off. But the maternal environment are trying to pick up all of those things that are not genetic, and given fair credit to the idea that there may be some genetic predisposition to some of these diseases. Okay, hopefully that addresses that question. So about 20% is additive, about 10% is the maternal permanent, and very much of it is environmental. So that's the context in which we're working when we're trying to parse out various factors that impact the way a lamb grows up through weaning time. So let's now kind of break this down. That first example that I showed would be when the dam was both the genetic dam and the rearing dam of a lamb. And here I'm showing just those direct additive effects, the contributions of that genetic dam and sire directly to the growth of that lamb. But in the case with fostering, when a different dam steps in as the mother rearing that lamb, we're breaking that connection of the genetic dam to that lamb, and instead really need to credit the foster dam for her mothering ability. And that's going to be a combination of both genetic and environmental factors that make her a better or worse dam in the way those progeny perform. So we need to break up that relationship of the genetic dam to the ultimate, to all of the impacts on the rearing of the lamb. So that is our second scenario. That's what we're trying to disentangle, if I may. If we move on to artificial rearing, again, still the genetic dam is providing half of the genes that end up in that lamb and impact its growth. But now we certainly don't have a foster ewe even contributing. We have a bottle, an artificial rearing environment that's contributing to the performance of those lambs. So in this new recording system that Rusty will explain, we're trying to separate out those three separate categories a little bit better than we've been able to do so historically. So that's the context of that. So those are the impacts we're trying to build in looking at factors affecting the lamb at weaning time. But it gets a little bit broader than that, because there are also effects on the dam or the ewe, and those are really being manifest in terms of the numbers of lambs she is accredited for at weaning time. So our first scenario were lambs that were born and reared by their own genetic dam. Sensibly, as is the norm, that genetic dam deserves and earns credit for both giving birth to and having reared the lamb. I think that's that's our norm. That's what we would anticipate. In the case where there is we break up the genetic dam from the rearing or foster dam, the genetic dam still deserves credit for giving birth. So if it's a set of triplets, she deserves credit for it. But it is actually the foster dam that needs to be credited for having reared that lamb. And lastly, if we're talking about lambs that are artificially reared, again, the genetic dam needs to be credited for the litter size, the number born, but no credit should be given to any ewe for having reared that lamb, because that's being done by us on a bottle or through some artificial rearing program. So that's what we're trying to do with these new recording approaches. We're trying to make sure we properly delineate the factors that affect the lamb's growth through weaning time, and as part of that, to properly accredit ewes for what they actually did in terms of rearing the lambs. They reared them themselves, a foster dam reared them, or we reared them on a bottle. So that's what we wish to delineate. And that's what I wanted to introduce in background, and I'd welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Ron. Really appreciate that background information. Does anyone have any questions for Ron? Like I said, I'll go over the mechanics on how to actually record this in Pedigree Master, but it was really great to hear that the impacts that this is going to have. It's going to make our evaluations more accurate compared to what we've had over the last several years. So if anyone has any questions, again, feel free to use the chat function or go ahead and you can unmute yourself and ask your question verbally as well.
Well, Rusty, either I was very clear, I set everyone asleep, or oh, here we go. Okay. So the question, I'll read it, is how does the impact on EBVs differ between the old approach and the fix in case where a bottle lamb dies before weaning time? Well, I think that I don't think there would be a huge impact in that particular scenario, because in that case, that bottle lamb would never have an opportunity to come back into the flock, which is one of the things that was causing some inequities in our evaluation. And no ewe would be credited for having reared that lamb. So in that case, I don't think there would be a direct impact for that particular scenario, if I've understood the question correctly.
Yeah, I think on a bottle lamb, the quote unquote credit for raising that lamb is being taken off of that genetic dam. So if it dies pre-weaning, it shouldn't have any effect on that genetic dam.
Okay, the second question was, there are some lambs that we should have taken off and bottle raised, but instead are left with mom and stealing from other ewes. What should they be called? That's one of the challenges that we all face with what sheep actually do versus what we'd like them to do in an optimal world in recording. There's not an easy solution to that. And right, let me kind of open this up. There's a lot of questions coming in, so let me try to visit with the one that Alice has raised first. So in that case, if they're left on that ewe, even though they're stealing from other ewes, I think the best we can do, if our view is still that genetic dam is the primary mother providing the current maternal care to that lamb, I believe we need to show the genetic dam as its rearing dam, if I may. If the view is that that lamb's completely weaned itself and is just wandering around stealing from every ewe because the dam is not providing any maternal care, the genetic dam is not providing any maternal care, then in a way it's almost as if it's being artificially reared, even though we're not the one providing the milk. I think that's a hard call, so my tendency would be to leave that on the genetic dam, and then she in a way will be penalized because that lamb may not grow as well for having been a poor mother. I hope that answers it, Alice. And then come back to me if I don't address these fully. Next question is likewise, what if the foster ewe has a foster lamb die midstream, right? So, and I'm presuming that foster lamb is one. So is that foster lamb another lamb fostered onto that ewe, or is it its own genetic lamb? Just to be clear when I answer this.
Ron, my question was, so yeah, say you foster a lamb onto a ewe and then 4 weeks later it dies. Does she get penalized, or do we just kind of not mark that one as being fostered at all and kind of forget the whole scenario, or how should we handle those?
Yeah, I mean, the way a foster ewe is credited is for having reared a lamb. So if you put a foster lamb on a ewe and she fails to rear it out to a reasonable point, by simply not recording that as being fostered, she's in a way being penalized because she's not getting credit for it. The question is, when has she done her job? So when do you make the cutoff? Because depending on the circumstance, 4 or 6 weeks in, some of these lambs can start to become independent if they have alternative feed. So that's really a personal call. But if your concern is she's not doing a good job and she's the cause of that foster lamb not nursing from her, I would simply not record it. She wouldn't get credit for that. Does that answer it, Michelle?
Yep.
Cool. All right. Let's see. Who will you also cover how the? Yes, I think Rusty responded to the question about the Pedigree Master. The next on my list is, can the fixed approach be applied retrospectively if we also desire to make the data changes? That's a great question that Rusty and I have gone back and forth with. And I struggle with this a wee bit. In the perfect world, if everyone actually went back and had the time and inclination to make that change, doing it retrospectively would have some value. But my sense is with busy schedules and a variety of priorities, that may be much to ask. So given that, I think it's best for us as a group, if I may, as part of NSIP, to kind of have a cutoff date. We did it one way up until now, and now we're able to do it better. And that in part will be valuable because it will allow us to get a sense, hopefully a way to evaluate if this change is improving matters. So although I think a fixed approach has its beauty, I think it will be hard to do that as a panacea across all operations. So then we have a mixed bag, if I may, of correction and not correction. That may not actually help us. So my view would be, we start now, change over to our recording system, and we flourish forward. What about a lamb whose dam died and was neither fostered or bottle raised, but made it on its own? Well, again, in a way, that's a lamb that is not, let me back and say this different. For that lamb, there's no ewe that should be credited for having rearing it. And so by not crediting the genetic dam or a foster dam, it effectively is capturing that case where that lamb managed to do it on its own. Okay. What about predator losses pre-weaning? Yeah, that's a challenge for us. I mean, that's truly not either a foster or a genetic dam's fault that we lost that lamb. But if she doesn't wean that lamb for whatever reason, it's hard to give her credit for it. So is the predation loss only, the fault of the predator, or may there have been an issue where that ewe headed off over the hills when the predator arrived and left her lamb vulnerable? It's really a hard call. And so typically we're not trying to delineate predator losses from other reasons that the lamb doesn't make it from weaning. In both cases, that ewe would not be credited for having reared that lamb for whatever the vagary of causes are. Not a perfect world, but that probably is the conservative approach. Another question, would there be a time when a lamb stealing from the other ewes would be tossed into the sick lamb contemporary group? Right. I mean, one way to identify a lamb as being different is by placing it in a separate contemporary group. This becomes a challenge for us in order, and this is not only in this case, but in all cases. Assigning animals contemporary group is really important to pick up systematic differences in the way they're managed. These ewes and lambs are in this pasture, and those ewes and lambs are in alternative pasture, and those pastures are different, and that impacts how well they do. The problem becomes is if we fine tune it to too small an extent, we're talking about a couple of lambs or a couple of ewes in each of many contemporary groups, we do a pretty terrible job, to be quite honest, of evaluating the impact of what that small contemporary group is. It takes energy, it takes information to estimate the average performance of every contemporary group we create. So when they become too small, the estimate of the impact of that contemporary group becomes poorly evaluated. And so if there are enough animals to delineate as something different, and I don't have a magic number for that, I kind of like 20, but that may be extreme, particularly for small flocks. But we have to have enough lambs to place in a contemporary group to have the estimate of the impact of that contemporary group be done well enough to have the impact that we want it to have. Alice, am I answering that well enough? I'm being a little wiggly there because I don't have a straightforward exact number to provide. Okay, if I'm unclear, please do ask again. Another one, as a terminal sire breed, the goal is to get as accurate of P weight as we can from artificially reared lambs. So if we turn a weaning weight for artificially reared lambs, will they be part of the same age contemporary group for the post-weaning weight? And does this change if we wean the AR lambs at different times than a group like mom-raised lambs? Right. So 2 parts to that. The fact that they are reared artificially and would be put into kind of this separate category in terms of crediting a ewe or otherwise as their dam would not inherently place them into a different contemporary groups than other lambs that were born alongside them. However, if they're being weaned at an entirely separate date than all the other lambs in that lambing cohort, that does, through the evaluation done in Lamb Plan, put them into a different weaning contemporary group. So that would confound the artificially reared lambs with those that are not artificially reared if they are weaned on a different date.
So Ron, to follow up on that then, so we roughly wean our mom-raised lambs at 60 days. So it's really a 2 or 3 week window around that. The artificially lambs get weaned very close to their real 30-day age weight. And they just get thrown in with the mom-raised lambs.
Yeah.
So would it be, I guess it's kind of a compromise, but if we just turned in their weaning weight at the same day we weigh all the other lambs with the mom, because when I look at the numbers, I can't tell the difference between my artificially raised lambs and the mom raised lambs at the 60-day range. Then they would end up, if we did that, with legitimate post-weaning weight.
Well, I'm hoping it would be legitimate either way, if I may, but their post-weaning weight would be considered among the rest of the cohort. The challenge on this is if you actually, you're suggesting taking another weight on them at 60 days at the same time as the rest?
Right, because actually I do, because I don't even know which ones were the artificially raised lambs. They're just all in the same pen.
As long as that age of weighing, that date of weighing coincides with when they were weighed, because their actual age at recording is taken into account, then yes, that would be a way to avoid them being separated into a different contemporary group. But the question is, they are different. And you have enough of them that are different that you want to look at their performance relative to all of the other artificially reared lambs, or do you want to think of their performance as part of the entire cohort?
Now we're looking, we'd be looking to try to get them. We really consider that from the post-weaning, they really are the same contemporary group. Because again, I can't, by looking at the data, I don't know which ones were artificially raised. And so,
Yep.
because we feed ad lib, free choice and wean close to 30 days. And so that's very different than the moms raising lambs up to 60 days. But what I really want is these lambs to get, for the potential rams, to have legitimate post-weaning data, EBVs.
Well, if you're and my sense is that when they're tossed in with everything else at 30 days, all those lambs and the remaining ewes are being treated the same up until your weight at 60 days. They're sharing that same 30 to 60 day environment that may well overcome some of the earlier impacts. Then if you're putting the 60-day weight in and the appropriate date, it may well be sensible to think of them as a single cohort of lambs.
Yeah, all right, thanks.
I'd be hesitant, just to be clear, I wouldn't want to put in a 30-day weight. And I know this is not what you're proposing, but then put in the date associated with the 60-day wean lambs. That would be
yeah, and we don't actually, because we wean when they hit 30 days and I just literally throw them over the fence, I don't take the time to even weigh them at that time.
Okay. Yeah, I think given your ambition, what the plan is, and the fact that they have 30 days where they're all being basically treated the same, they just don't happen to have a mom, but they didn't anyhow. I think the balance is exactly what you're proposing.
Yeah, all right, thanks.
Let's see. I'm not sure. Will the recording include the chant transcript? Ogie, I don't know. Does it, Rusty?
It should include what the chat that came through over here. I don't know. There was a couple of questions I think were privately sent to you, so I didn't see those. I don't know if those will show up or not.
I'm trying to read them all out, so hopefully that'll get captured.
Yeah.
Alice, going back to your comment, I think so. I always worry when somebody says I think so, because that means I did a lousy job of answering a question. So please do ask again to clarify. Let's see. Probably some people are choosing to post them private. Yes, sorry, I see that note. Michelle, I am reading them all out, so hopefully that will capture all of the questions. Okay.
All right.
So if there's no others, Rusty, I'll turn it back over to you, and I'm happy to address other things as they arise.
Yeah, just for the sake of time, I think I'll move on to the mechanics of recording, and if other questions come up, please folks just go ahead and shout them out or type them in, and we'll make sure they get addressed.
Just one quick one, just to finish up, and then shift it entirely to you. A question that came out about how we deal with Easter lambs leaving early plus. Well, the way that is going to be done, if you're taking a weight on those lambs at that age, and you're putting that date and weight into the evaluation, that's going to throw them in an entirely separate contemporary group than those that you keep on longer. So they are going to be dealt with as a separate cohort.
And Ron, does that mean we should manually code them as a separate cohort, or even if we say they're all in group one under the covers, it's going to separate them because they were weighed at a different time?
Yeah, the way it works in Australia, they're going to yank those out based on the date that you record for weaning. So you could separately assign them a management group, but those are going to be confounded.
Got it.
Over to you, Rusty.
Okay, well, thanks a bunch, Ron. I'm going to get my
stop sharing. Is that what I need to do here?
I believe so. I think when I start sharing, it'll automatically take over.
Okay. All right.
Can folks see my, can they see my screen up?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we see it.
All right, great. So like I said, we're gonna, there's some changes to the mechanics of how we're gonna record these animals to make sure credit is going to where it's due. So we're actually gonna utilize an existing technique but apply it in a little bit different method. So I'll just go through a couple of examples here because I think that's the best way. I have just a couple slides to help walk us through this example, but the majority of the work I'm going to do actually just in Pedigree Master. So just to make sure the definitions are the same, I just want to have these up here. Try to use the same definitions that Ron used in his portion. When I talk about a fostered lamb, that's a lamb.
Hey, Rusty.
Yes.
Can you expand your screen to full size?
I'm going to try to make this bigger here.
That'll be good.
I don't want to go to full size because I'm going to jump back and forth. So
okay, that looks good. I can see it now.
Okay.
Thank you.
So just for definitions here, just to keep things consistent, a foster lamb is going to be what I refer to as a lamb that's raised by a ewe that's not that lamb's genetic dam. So the same thing that Dr. Lewis was talking about. And then an artificially reared lamb, it's a live lamb raised by means other than a live ewe. So it's not fostered, not reared by its genetic dam. So it's our bottle lambs, bucket lambs, whether on a machine, however you want to call them. Okay? So just to keep those things separate. So let's go through a quick example here of a foster lamb. So again, we have a lamb that's raised by a dam that's not its genetic dam. When we're actually recording that information in Pedigree Master, we're going to record the birth type and rear type just as we would normally, but we're going to utilize the foster ewe feature. And we can access that through the Pedigree Display tab. So we're just going to jump over to Pedigree Master here. And I apologize if the screen's a little small. I'll see if I can't make that a little bit bigger. Oh, that's a little too big. All right. Sorry about that. We'll go through this and I'll see if I can't make it bigger as we go. Okay, so we're going to go through an example here. We're going to add a record just like we normally would. Okay, so let's get over here to an example. I apologize. I'm jumping between programs here and I'm not able to get back to my other screen. You can bear with me for just 1 second. I'll see if I can't get this figured out. All right, there we go. I'm sorry about that. We're going to go through this quick example here, and I'm just going to use an example from my flock with some hypothetical lambs for 2021 here. So you can see here we have a ewe. This will be our dam. This is the genetic dam of our lambs. So it's 2019-1906, and she has 2 lambs. Okay, so she has lambs 2129 and 2130. Okay, she's only able to raise one of those lambs though. So we need to figure out a new way to raise this lamb here, 2130. So we're going to foster that lamb onto another ewe. Okay, so it's being fostered onto another live sheep. And that ewe we're fostering onto here is number 1911. Okay. So for both of our lambs, okay, so our 2129 and our 2130 lambs, both are going to have the same pedigree being recorded in the system. Okay. They're both going to receive the correct birth type. So they're both born twins. They're going to get the birth type of 2, but they're both going to be raised as singles. So they get a rear type of 1. Okay. And then we are on our fostered lamb, we're going to use that foster ewe function. So I'm just going to jump to Pedigree Master. We're going to go ahead and go through this example. I'm going to decrease the size of this, so hopefully we can see both of these at the same time. So we're going to start off just like any other data input. So we're going to start off with the flock ID, the year of birth, and then the ID number of our lamb. So we have 2129 here. Okay. And our dam is 1906. And the sire, I'm just going to pick a sire. We'll just pick that one. Okay. Going to record it just like normal. Birth type, it was born a twin. Okay. But it's going to be raised as a single. Okay. And we'll just put in a hypothetical birth date and birth weight here, just so we don't get any errors popping up. We'll say this is an 8-pounder. Okay. So this is our lamb that's going to be raised by the genetic dam. Okay. Everyone's comfortable with that so far? Now we're going to move on to our second lamb. This is the lamb that's going to be, it's the litter mate, but it's going to be fostered onto a different ewe. So we're going to put in its ID number. Okay. Just repeated the last animal's pedigree. Okay. And we still have a same birth type of 2. We have a rear type of 1. We'll just put in a hypothetical birth weight here and say it was a 7.5 pounder. Okay. And we're going to save that record. Okay. So we're done on the add and change record screen, but now I need to foster that lamb over to its foster ewe. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is going to go to the pedigree display function. And I'm going to go over here on the pick list on the right hand side, and I'm going to find the lamb that's in question here. Okay, so we have our 2130 who we're going to be fostering. And on the breeding tab, down here on the bottom right, there's a section for foster ewe ID. Okay, so here we can enter in this foster ewe, or who that lamb is actually going to be reared by. So we have 620 156 2019 SV 1911. Okay. So now we have successfully recorded that lamb as a foster lamb. So now that credit for raising that lamb is going to go to this foster ewe here, this 1911. Okay. So this is the basis of our new technique for our bottle lambs. So we need to understand this new fostering function so we can understand the bottle lamb section. Okay. Any questions on that process so far?
Rusty, go ahead.
Oh, I have the same question Oogie does. So if the foster dam already had a lamb,
Yep,
now
that was
you're
my
adding
question too.
second one, then you're going to mark them as raised as 2, right? Rear type 2.
Correct, correct. So if this foster ewe, so if she says, for example, she had a single and now she's raising twins. Now that the lamb of that foster ewe will be birth type as a single, but then it'll have a rearing type of twins because it's going to be reared with that foster lamb. Does that make sense?
And yeah. And I see in your slide, Rusty, you say put this lamb in a different contemporary group. So why is that?
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. I was actually just changing that as Ron was talking. Actually, I need to just delete that because we're going to, unless that foster lamb, if that family, that foster ewe and foster lambs are raised in a different manner, we don't need to put that into a different contemporary group. If you have a whole separate contemporary group of just ewes and with foster lambs, then we can record them as a different contemporary group if they're managed differently than the rest of the cohorts. Does that make sense?
So Rusty, if I may kind of build on that point, which is well said. I mean, again, we need to be cautious about parsing our data into too many contemporary groups. So if we think the environment, even though that lamb is fostered, is the same, my error is to do exactly as Rusty is saying. But if you have a whole group of fostered lambs and ewes and you pull them all aside and you manage them as a different group, so ewes that are fostering their own genetic as well as alternative lambs, and they're handled differently, that in my mind defines putting them in a separate contemporary group. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, that helps out a lot, Ron. I appreciate that. All right, any other questions on the foster function before we move on? I'm sorry, I've been pulling up on my screens. I lost my chat box, so I'm gonna see if I can't get that pulled back up. Here we go. All right. All right, so sorry for that little pause there. Now we're going to move on to an artificially raised situation. Okay, so again, we're going to use this foster function, but we're going to use it in a different manner. Okay, so again, an artificially reared lamb is a lamb that's raised by artificial means, not being raised by a live dam. And in these situations, how we've been doing it in the past is not going to change. It's the birth type is going to be recorded as normal, but then all of our orphan lambs, or all of these artificially reared lambs, are going to receive a rear type of 1. And where the new functionality comes in is that all of these artificially raised lambs are going to be quote unquote fostered onto a phantom ewe. Okay, and I'm going to show you what that looks like here in just a minute. Okay, but all of the artificially reared lambs within a lambing period or lambing window are going to be quote unquote raised by this phantom foster ewe. Okay, and I hope that'll make sense here as I go through an example. Okay. So we're going to have an example here of a set of triplets. Okay, so here we have the genetic dam in question here. It's 2018-1834, and she has 3 lambs, 2101, 2102, and 2103. Okay. But we're going to be removing 2103, okay, and raising that on a bucket. Okay, so we're going to go through that example to see how we do this. We're going to go ahead and record all 3 of those lambs. Okay. So we're going to use, I'm going to do the add and change records way right now. I'll show you the spreadsheet method here in just a few minutes. Okay. So we're going to start off with the lambs that are going to be raised by the genetic dam. 2101. This will be okay, so here's our dam. Again, we're just going to pick a sire. We'll just pick that one. Okay. So the birth type, because it was born a triplet, okay, because we're removing one of those lambs, the 2 lambs that remain on the ewe are going to have a rear type of twins, rear type of 2. Okay. We'll just put this in just so we don't get any errors. Say it's an 8-pounder. We're going to go ahead and save that record. Okay. We're going to move on to the second lamb that was raised by the ewe still. Okay, so we have 620, 156, 2021, SV 2102. I'm going to go ahead and repeat the last animal's pedigree just to make things easier. Again, this lamb was still being raised by the ewe, so it still has a birth type of 3, a rear type of 2. Okay. We'll just say it's a 9-pounder. Save that record. Now we're going to move on to our third lamb. Now this is the lamb that's going to be artificially reared. Okay, so we have our, put in the ID just like normal, 2103, repeat the pedigree. Okay. What we need to do now though, is we need to change the rear type to a single. Okay. Now we're done on this screen. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go over to our pedigree display. And we're going to foster this lamb onto that phantom ewe. Okay, so here's we have our first 2 lambs that were raised by the dam. It's 2101, 2102. 2103 is what we're fostering over onto the artificial system. Okay, so we're using this foster ewe function. Okay, we're going to make up a phantom ewe that is raising all of these bottle lambs. Okay, so we're going to pick a year that is distant in the past, okay, to differentiate this from all of our other lambs. Okay, so this foster ewe, this is a ewe that doesn't physically exist. Okay, but all of the lambs that are bottle raised in a given lambing period are going to be raised, quote unquote, by this phantom foster ewe. So I put in the abbreviation here, BTL001. So that way, just as I'm going through the records personally, I know that that's not a real sheep. That is the quote unquote foster ewe for all of my bottle lambs. Okay. Now, what I think it's important to change here, we also need to change the contemporary group for these lambs. Okay, so we need to set up these contemporary groups for our lambs. Now, if you're not familiar with how to set up custom group names, so just from the home screen here, if you go to groups, you can actually customize what these are. Okay, so for this lamb here, I want to make sure that it's in being coded in the contemporary group for orphan lambs, and I've got that set up as group number 3. Okay, so all of my orphan lambs I can put off into contemporary group number 3 to denote them as a foster lamb. So that's the basics of the add and change record means of having these artificially raised lambs. So again, we're fostering them onto a quote unquote phantom ewe. And that way that phantom ewe is then going to be getting the quote unquote credit for raising that lamb. It's not going to be going to the genetic dam. Okay. So I have a question here. I'll go ahead and read out. Do you use the same phantom ewe for every year's bottle lambs, or do you need a new phantom ewe for each year that you have bottle lambs? Ron, I don't know if you have an answer for that. I believe you can use the same phantom ewe for every birth year.
Yes, you can. The only thing that needs to happen is that foster ewes ID cannot overlap with and Rusty suggested this, cannot overlap with a proper ewe in your system. It needs to be a completely anonymous value or code, but it can be the same code used across time. So I would kind of pick one out that's unique that you'll never assign to a sheep, and I would continue to using that phantom foster ewe ID for your flock.
So we are, Ron and I have put together a document that's going to be posted up onto the website that explains this. And in that example, we used a phantom ewe with the year of birth as, I believe, 1950, just to make sure we don't have any overlap, as Ron just mentioned. So we can use one that's very distant in the past to make sure we're not going to have that crossover.
And Rusty, a question that was sent was, is there a maximum number of the lambs the phantom ewe can have? The answer is no. She is just being built in to avoid giving a ewe credit, either a proper foster ewe or a genetic ewe credit for having reared a lamb that they have not reared. It's the only reason she's being built in. And so she can have as many lambs as you want to assign her to.
And then Ron, there's another question that came in that this is a good one for you. Do the other ewes get compared to that phantom ewe?
I don't, my understanding in this, again, we'll learn as this goes forward, that phantom ewe is just a dummy to plug in. That phantom ewe only has no genetic impact at all in the evaluation. The way that would be handled is sort of part of that environmental noise. So it's not being built in as a mode of comparison.
Do you even need to enter her as a real animal, like through the pedigree display, or can she just be like can't you put a 0000 for a birth year, and that just sort of signals it's a reference animal from history?
Yeah, you can put in, I would make it a kind of a valid number, but I certainly wouldn't add her to your pedigree data. She just shows up as a unique value separate from anything else that matters, because if it overlaps with any ewe in your flock, it's going to do exactly what the question Etienne had asked about, it draws her into the comparison. She's just a dummy out there to try to avoid misaccrediting genetic dams and foster dams for rearing lambs they do not rear.
So the only place you should put that string is in the foster ewe field, but not like in your pedigree data. That animal shouldn't appear in your group of ewes present on your farm.
Absolutely. She should not appear anywhere except as a unique foster dam, a unique dummy foster dam. Yep.
Makes sense.
You don't need to go through and do an add and change record for that foster, for that phantom ewe.
Perfect. Okay.
And go ahead, Ron.
Well, Oogie had also asked, does all phantom ewes have to not overlap with any other ewe? in the same NSIP run, i.e. across flocks, yes, they cannot appear anywhere. And that's why in Rusty's recommendation and what's going to be documented, our suggestion is use your own flock code at the front end of that dummy use tag number and your own unique evaluation to make sure she is unique to your own operation and does not appear anywhere else in the system. So so to make sure she cannot appear as a proper U in any other flock or in any other year.
Well, wouldn't that be prevented as long as your flock ID at the front end of the 16-digit string is there? So
exactly.
So we
and that's why we're recommending that.
Okay. So we wouldn't, you could still use the last 6 characters any way you like, because it's already going to be individual to your flock if your first 5 or 6 characters is you.
Exactly. I mean, if there was we offered kind of a system, I think it was the 6-digit code and then a given birth year and then some kind of unique final set of digits to identify that you. You know, maybe some consistency might help us when we go back and look for things, but all that's really important is she's uniquely identified in your flock, not overlapping with anything else.
Then there was another question that came in here. If a lamb dies, say 10 days before weaning, is it correct to weigh it and give it a weaning date 10 days earlier? Is there any benefit to weighing that deceased lamb?
I mean, what will happen is because its weaning date is separate, well, 2 things will happen. If it shows up as being weaned, that genetic dam, I'm presuming that's not a fostered lamb, but the genetic dam is going to be given credit for having reared that lamb, right?
Right.
And so the question is, does she deserve credit for that? Given that the weaning date is going to be unique, it's going to be popped into its own unique contemporary group, and its age adjustment is going to be based on its actual age at that point of recording. So effectively, it's not a real harm in doing that, and it's actually kind of documenting what happened to that lamb. The question becomes, does that ewe deserve credit for having reared it?
Yeah, and what is the answer to that?
Well, I mean, these are all the nuances. It's really, you know, if that lamb died because it got slammed into a fence, I don't think it's the ewe's fault. If that lamb died because that ewe has never looked after it and is providing poor maternal care, and so it's always been one that's been a poor doer and just has never thrived, and you think the ewe is responsible, then I don't think it deserves credit for it. She deserves credit for it.
Seems reasonable.
So sadly, on some of these things, I just don't have a carte blanche answer, because I had a dear friend when I was in Scotland who said, you know, they're biological beasts. They don't do what we always want them to. And that's a reality. And so sometimes we just have to do what we think is most sensible as we do with our recording, as we do in our recording. Yep.
All right. Well, just real quickly, if you have more questions, feel free to keep those coming in. But I just wanted to cover spreadsheet entry as well. It's, in my opinion, the spreadsheet entry is actually a little bit easier than the add and change record function. I know a lot of folks utilize spreadsheets. It's fairly straightforward. For those lambs that are being fostered or artificially raised, the column heading is simply foster _ U. And you would go ahead and just enter in that foster U ID number for those lambs. So I just want to show you real quick. If you ever get confused and you don't know what a particular column heading should be, you can go to Reports and Utilities under Data Files and then go to your main database. And for the vast majority of these, whatever the column heading is here on this main database screen looks like, that's what column heading you'll utilize in your spreadsheet upload. So I'm just going to scroll over here until we find it. And you can see here, Foster_U is the column heading that would be used. You can also utilize this screen here, the main database screen, to enter that information in. So I could come down here to a lamb and I could enter in a Foster ID here and use this method for data entry. So again, the same mechanics apply. You use the Foster_U function. You just have to add an additional column with the column heading of Foster_U. And only those lambs that were fostered or artificially reared will have an entry in those fields. If you are doing a spreadsheet upload into Pedigree Master, you have to remember that if you have just a few of your lambs that have something in this Foster_U category, all the rest of the lambs that don't have something in there need to have an asterisk put in there as a placeholder. That way, when you save it as a text file to load into Pedigree Master, you have a placeholder right there for that. Okay. So again, I think the spreadsheet upload is the easiest way to do it. Exact same mechanics. You record a Foster_U. You also have, you can just delineate the different contemporary group with the column heading GRP as well for those foster lambs or those artificially reared lambs. So there's a question here, can I send a current list of what those column headings are? Yes, I can certainly do that. I can just go ahead and update that, put it up on the website so everyone can see it. So I'd be glad to do that. So. Okay. All right. So we'll keep going through some of these questions. So a lamb may be in one contemporary group at birth, then a different group at weaning if they're weaned earlier than the others. Does this make only 2 contemporary groups or more? So yes, you can, if there's a change in management from birth to weaning or from weaning to post-weaning, for example, you can differentiate contemporary groups. So you can have a separate contemporary group for every age category. Let me just go back to an add and change record screen here just to show that. Okay. So in the add and change record, you can delineate a different group for each of your age categories. So if you manage all as one group up until weaning time, they can all stay in one contemporary group. Say you split one group off and for example, if you have a group that you're getting ready to send to a ram sale or to a show or something, and you're feeding them differently than the remainder of the group, you can differentiate contemporary group for the early post-weaning time period, just to show that those are in two different management strategies, 2 different contemporary groups. Okay, other questions we've got here. Is lamb ease being reported back to us? That's a great question that I don't know the answer to, but I will certainly look into that. So I know I get it reported to me in the large data sets that I get from Australia, but if you're not getting it, I can look into that. So. And is there an advantage to differentiating contemporary groups? I guess, Alice, if you could maybe expand on that question just a little bit. Not exactly sure what you're getting at there. Go ahead.
Oh, I think Alice just had a string of questions. So she was asking about if she separates Easter market groups into their own group, she should make them their own contemporary group if they're being fed differently. But then her follow-on question was, but is that good because now she's got small groups?
Well, I mean, if those Easter lambs are being recorded at a different time period than the remainder of the animals, they're going to be off in their own contemporary group anyways. But if they're all, say, if you're weighing all of your lambs at 80 days of age, and then after that you're sending some off for the Easter lamb market, and their others are staying in the flock or herd, then you would keep them all at the same contemporary group for that 80-day wait. After that, those lambs that went off for Easter just aren't going to have a record there, so it's not going to split those into different management groups or different contemporary groups.
Rusty, if I may, the only caveat may be that if those Easter lambs are being identified as something separate earlier on, and then are separated and fed differently, and then everything is weighed at 80 days on the same date, if I may, then those group that is truly being handled differently, being fed differently, given again, there's enough of them, that's always the balance point, would likely need to be categorized in a separate contemporary group. So I very much agree with Rusty's comment that if they're all together in the same up to 80 days and half go off and half stay on, there'd be no reason to separate them. Only if they were being managed differently before reaching that weigh period.
All right. Well, I appreciate the question there. There's a couple other questions about spreadsheets. I'll post up what those column headings are going to be. There's a couple individual situations here. For the vast majority of NSIP members, data entry has to go through PedigreeMaster. So there's no direct submission of data through spreadsheets to LambPlan. There's a couple individual situations where flocks are grandfathered in to the old system. So those are individual situations, and I can talk to you folks offline on how to do that. But yeah, the vast majority of our spreadsheet upload is recording in a spreadsheet, uploading that into PedigreeMaster, and then doing the data submission through the PedigreeMaster files. So yeah, there's individual situations. I'll talk to you individually offline. I said we have been recording this session. I'll get that posted up to the website. If we do have a document as well that we've typed up that explains this in easy to read steps, that'll be posted on the website as well. As you read through that and as you get into this with the 2021 lamb crops, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, shoot me an email. I'll do the best to answer it. If I can't do it, I'll find the folks who have the answers. So very much appreciate everyone joining in. Again, if you have questions, shoot me an email. We'll get things taken care of. So, well, thank you all very much. Definitely appreciate the time, and good luck as we go into the 2021 lambing season.
Thanks, you guys. That was helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.